Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you this evening. Good to see some familiar faces. It's really nice to have you on such a hopeful afternoon from some perspectives, where I'm just kind of vamping here until ready, waiting for a couple more people to come on. I'm Susan Jarrett, and this is I'm a member of the board of the Newport Bay Conservancy. And we're here for our first diversity talk. So looks like we're about 3 minutes into our time. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm really delighted to welcome you to this talk. It's the first in our diversity, equity, and inclusion speaker series, which is going to continue monthly, May through July. So please see our website for information on the next speakers. And Hillary has muted you all, but for the talk, but we're going to have Q&A at the end. And please feel free to use the chat to make any kind of comments or questions you want to while the talk is going on. It's my great pleasure to welcome Marcus Trinidad. Hello, Marcus, Director of the Audubon Center at Debs Park in Los Angeles. Marcus was born and raised in Northeast LA, where his family has lived for 70 years. His formal education is in geology and anthropology, and prior to his work with Audubon in LA, Marcus spent time as a biology technician for the US Forest Service and an urban forester for Northeast Trees and Tree People. Prior to coming to Debs, he served as director of Audubon Youth Environmental Stewards, where he engaged with and inspired youth to connect to nature and their community through restoration and volunteer projects. At Debs, Marcus has nurtured a growing community of volunteers, youth, and community partnerships, implemented a facility and grounds improvement plan, and partnered with the National Park Service to establish a vibrant plant nursery. And we're already plotting a field trip of NBC up to Debs. So can't wait to see that, see what you've done there. It's impressive to me how many and varied settings and aspects of environmental work Marcus has been involved in. Most relevant to us this evening is his impressive 2 decades long commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion in the environmental movement, including co-directing LA's Environmental Professionals of Color chapter. Through that work, Marcus promoted and sponsored forums for people of color working in environmentally related careers. He was recognized in 2017 by the North American Association for Environmental Education as the recipient of the Rosa Parks and Grace Lee Boggs Award for his leadership in environmental justice, education, and advocacy. So Marcus, thank you so much for joining us this evening to speak about supporting a holistic approach to urban conservation.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and excited to speak with y'all. And then, this being the first, I guess conversation that y'all are having, I guess it can only get better, right? So there's definitely a lot to look for there. I wanted to start just with, just putting it out there, like, I don't have it all figured out. I don't know anyone that does. I just know a lot of people that really want to do better and are getting to a point where we see a lot of issues that are happening today in the conservation movement. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And as far as I can tell, folks that are in conservation work are here because they love it. And it's amazing work. And I think when we, as conservationists, I know for myself, I didn't really get into conservation work to really talk about what it's like being a brown person in conservation work. It was because I really wanted to do some awesome stuff with land stewardship. I wanted to study trees. I wanted to look at rocks, all that cool stuff you do on camping trips. And that was really where I kind of learned that, wow, you can get paid for this stuff. So I think, over time and really being in this field for a really long time, I started to realize that you know, I didn't see a lot of folks that looked like me that were doing the same job as me. I mean, when it comes to pulling weeds and working out in the field, I mean, we were all one and alike. But when it came to really designing projects and putting projects together to fundraise and all of that stuff, I started to see a lot of different faces. And then it got to a point where we really started to have some conversations about how to navigate through a movement that's really fueled by passion. And I do apologize. I think my family just got home. We live in a tiny home. It's 450 square feet. And I'm in the kitchen, the living room, the office, all in one space. So we might have a 4-month-old puppy jump in and an 8-year-old boy. So I do apologize. So I feel when we really get into looking at this work, I think everyone's really excited about the work we do, right? And we start to think about what can make our work a bit more, I guess, impactful, and how we can be more efficient, and just where we can improve as individuals. And then we get to a place that we have to acknowledge that it's not the same for everyone, and not everyone we not all have the same barriers. And what does that mean for our work? What does that mean for our organization? What does that mean for our sanity when we look at really accomplishing great things? And we always like to say, you know what, we're doing this work because we're saving the planet, right? We're saving landscape. And I still believe that. But I also feel that we need to do it in a way that is not just inclusive of each other, folks that have already had some of the Kool-Aid, but the folks that have no idea about the work that we're doing. And I think when it comes down to it, when we look at equity, diversity, and inclusion, or diversity, equity, inclusion, or justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, whatever it's called on whatever day of the week it is, we're doing this because it's not the same for everyone. And we have some hard facts that we have to really look at. And a lot of this is stemmed from this country being built on white supremacy and institutional racism. And that for some of us, we're not safe out in the wilderness. We're not safe in some areas in the same fashion that everyone is. And it comes down to individuals walking in Central Park looking at birds. So keeping this in mind, like there's motivation for why we are having these conversations. And it's very uncomfortable, because we look at this as like, wow, like these are basic things that we should learn at home, you know, how to treat people well and how to, you know, be a good person. But then we also think, wow, wait a minute. Some of these folks did learn this at home. And now we have to come to work, or we have to come to a social group, or we have to look at workshops so we can learn a little bit more about this. And it's not about judging where we are as individuals. It's about acknowledging that everyone is in their own space. And if you made it this far, I'm confident that folks are looking to improve where they're standing, which I think is awesome. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the talk. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to go into sharing a PowerPoint and just talk about some of the experience that we've had here. Again, I'm at the Audubon Center at Debs Park, and I'm going to go ahead and share some of what I have going on. And then I hope to have a discussion afterwards. Let me go into, wait, how to, can you all see that?
Yes.
All right. So I want to talk about, just how we've been able to have an impact at Debs Park. Again, this is some stats that we have where we're a nature center within National Audubon Society, one of the biggest, largest conservation organizations in the country. And what the Audubon Center means to the conservation movement. The Audubon Center at Debs Park was the first center that was built in the network that served predominantly Latino population. It was designed specifically to reach out the Latino community in Northeast Los Angeles. It was state of the art at the time, the first with the LEED Platinum certification, all this really cool stuff off the grid, right? We are located here. I apologize for the pixelated graphic, but this is 282 acres of space. We manage 17 acres, and you can see down closer to the center of the graphic, you could see where we are with the little star. That's where the center is. And you can just see how close we are to Los Angeles. And this is not what folks normally think of when they think of LA. They don't think of a 282 acre lot. They don't think of, a tree canopy. They don't think of Debs Park, the fourth largest park that we have in Los Angeles. Typically folks are thinking of of traffic, Hollywood. If you're lucky, you might be thinking of tacos, but folks might not even be thinking of that, which is unfortunate. So one thing we really want to look at is as a nature center, how do we get to a point where we can start talking about conservation and it taken seriously, even within the conservation movement, because we're so used to talking about these huge open spaces with a lot of acreage. We're used to talking about desert. We're used to talking about the forest. We're not used to talking about 17 acres in Highland Park. So one thing I do want to acknowledge, this is Gabrielino Tongva territory. We do have a really great partnership with our indigenous community. And one of the things we have been able to do is really open the doors in a meaningful way to invite the indigenous community back into what we do at the center. So another thing, just to highlight some of the programs we have. And when you think of an Audubon Center, we're offering a lot of the work, the things that would be consistent across the country with nature centers. Another thing we look at is really being able to offer community programming that community members have identified as being meaningful. Things that are looked at as relevant, and doing it in a way that is including the community in a meaningful way. So some of the things that we're also really excited about is how we're able to look at conservation and how it was done before, and really with that idea of if you build it, they will come. And it worked for a really long time until it stopped working. And it got to a point where we had to really analyze and strategize, how are we going to accomplish our goal? What is our mission? And for us, we could talk about bird banding and plant surveys and all this cool stuff all day. But if the community doesn't care, not because they're not interested, because they're unaware of the projects, or they have a different set of priorities, then our projects aren't going to be as meaningful. So we had to take a step back and really try to understand what it is that the community does want to see, and how are we going to be able to not just look at our priorities as a conservation organization, but what are the priorities of the community, and how are we able to get to a point where one hand washes the other, and being able to focus on policy that was relevant to the conservation movement and the community was where we really had to find our sweet spot. And when we talk about sweet spot, it's really taking a step back and saying, okay, you have the community, you have all these environmental issues, you have the social needs and the health needs, but yet we're a bird organization, right? Like, what are we doing thinking about anything other than birds? And if you look at our Instagram and if you look at our social media, you'll have a lot of folks that will share that very sentiment, like, hey, stick to birds, you know. Can't you just be a bird watcher, and why do you have to be brown and be a bird watcher? You know, all of these different comments that are going to be there. We still have to do the work, and we definitely do not get caught up in trying to justify or prove that the work is important anymore, because we already know that it is. It's now in the fabric of what we do, and it is vital for us to do in order to accomplish our mission. And you know, when we look at what we do and how we do it, it's really about walking through these gates, being able to show up and see a space that the community can really embrace. And for the most part, you walk in and the community member will see this, and it's like, wow, you have this really amazing building, all native landscaping. They're like, wow, Marcos, this is beautiful. Then the question is, how much does it cost to get in? We're like, oh no, it's free. Go ahead, walk in. Then you see our courtyard, and you see everything else that's available, and it's, again, you know, a look of amazement, like just astonished, not really having an understanding or a place of reference. And the question then is like, wow, this is beautiful. Well, what do I do now? And for us, it's always like, well, that's easy. You know, you go sit on that rock and you wait for some birds to show up. Like, what do you mean? What do you do? It's like, isn't that what we all do? And it's this idea of passive recreation versus active recreation. And does it ever exist where it's not verse? It's almost working together. And for us as a conservation organization, and specifically as an organization that has a network of centers that engage community members, one thing we noticed is that we were already separating ourselves from the community just by them walking through the door. Because one thing I was not able to show was a sign that we had with a list of rules. No dogs, no grilling, no piñatas, no soccer, no loud music, all the things that our community really likes to do. And I even had to scratch my head. I'm like, really? No carne asada? Like what's up with that? Like, how does this even make sense? So culturally, what was happening is we were disconnecting from people before they even stepped into the space. And was not a point where we're just like, okay, you know what, carne asada for everyone, let's get the piñatas out. No, it wasn't about changing who we are as conservationists and the values that we're bringing. It was all about understanding that all use of outdoor space is valid, and that it's important to accept that people use outdoor space in many different ways. And if folks spend their whole week, sometimes 6 days a week, outside working, that maybe on their last day that they have in the week where they don't have to work, maybe they don't want to hike a trail. Maybe they don't want to kayak down a river. Maybe they just want to sit under a tree and have a cold drink or hang out with their family and not be active. So what we were doing is disconnecting from that. We were balancing what our priorities were in a very different way. And it was assuming that, you know what, everyone's behind a desk and at a computer all day. So on the weekend that they have off, they must want to be active. They must want to go on a hike. And in reality, the community that we were working with was not doing that. So we had to change things up a bit. And one thing that we learned when we were looking at our conservation goals, our mission, all of these things that make us Audubon, make us who we are, we had to we realized that we needed the community more than the community needed us. And that was a hard reality, because I think at any point, if you had to acknowledge that in any relationship, like, wow, I need my wife, we already know this, I need my wife more than she needs me. So our conversation and our relationship is very, very different because of that. But understanding the community and moving to a place where instead of us coming to this space and offering everything that they need or what we want, the conversations and the programming changed. So we were able to really deliver programming that was needed and that was going to be impactful. So some of the thing this picture I like to show because it shows where we are in Los Angeles, and it shows the nature center in relationship to some of the pocket parks that we've adopted. And we adopted these pocket parks because we realized that the community, not all the community, was able to get to the center. So we also had to meet the community at where they are and deliver programming in their neighborhoods if we wanted them to participate. So again, the Arroyo Seco, the center is along the Arroyo Seco, which is a tributary of the LA River. And this allowed us to really be able to get in there and work with community, in the community, and deliver programming that they had identified was needed. Again, when we talk about the LA River, folks, yeah, it's channeled. There are some soft bottoms. I know this for the plant geeks here. I know you're identifying, like, why is he showing us a picture of Arundo? Where most of the people are like, wow, that's so beautiful. I know when I look at it, I'm like, look at that Arundo, it's coming back. But you could just see the amount of habitat or the possibility of what can happen here. Some of the things that we also look at, this is also along the LA River, Cottonwood. It's a amazing space when you're looking at an urban environment and how that works. The thing that we talk about with native plants and just the ecology that exists within an urban and open space interface is the ability to connect with these different species. Here, in those cottonwoods, we were able to spot leaf varios. So for us, that's super exciting because that'll stop construction, right? And this park in particular is Rio de Los Angeles, and it is a park that has a wetland space. But in addition to wetlands, it has soccer, it has tennis. My daughter was playing tennis there. It has basketball courts. It has all of these things. So it's combining active and passive recreation. I think it should be a model of how parks are built, because you are now introducing a wetlands and endangered species to folks that might not otherwise get out to see a wetlands. So it does a pretty amazing thing. And I have to show birds. I'm gonna do it. And one thing that we really looked at as we get into being able to look at how we show up for the community is being able to really take in the priorities and be out in the community and what is affecting the community in a way that is either going to allow them to participate in your programming or prevent them from participating in your programming. And one thing that we realized that was a huge barrier is a lot of our potential volunteers and supporters and participants were afraid of being displaced. And when we would go out and talk about all the wonderful projects that we were doing along the LA River and the habitat restoration and bicycle lanes going in and all this really cool stuff, we started to hear comments like, why should we clean up that park if it's only going to be for newcomers that are coming in? Or I'm going to be pushed out, why am I going to clean up the park? And instead of me coming up with a laundry list of just tons of reasons why you should clean up a park, health reasons and all this other stuff, I just listened. And I started to hear this over and over again. What was now being shared was very different, because I was not used to hearing issues of homelessness or affordable housing or issues of domestic violence, substance abuse, in some cases, human trafficking. Usually, conservationists are like this. We didn't go to school to deal with those issues. That's social justice. That's social welfare. If I want to create bird habitat, why do I have to worry about domestic violence? And it turns out that if you can wake up early in the morning and the first thought that comes to your head is, I'm gonna go look at some birds, you're waking up with a certain level of privilege that not a lot of these folks were doing. And again, if there are issues that exist in our neighborhood, and as an organization, as Audubon, we're bringing this nature center to Highland Park. I think at the time in 2003, we built it as Audubon's gift to Los Angeles. And these are the issues that are happening. And we're doing nothing to address any of them. Then we missed the mark completely. So we started to really think about what it is we can actually do as a bird organization, right? I couldn't possibly now become an expert on affordable housing and homelessness and domestic violence and all those things, or do I want to, right? So what is it that we can do to actually show up? So the great thing about the Audubon is we can get that bird's eye view, right? We zoom out as far as we need to see where all these things connect. And one thing that we were seeing is a lot of homeless that was existing in the parks. And if you are out there doing land management, you know what I'm talking about. You can clean up, you can weed, you can do everything. It almost seems like, hey, you know what? Hard work. And the camps just move right in after you cleaned up for them. Make a mess, and then you clean up again. And if the city is not on board, then it's just these sweeps that push the camps from one site to another. They clean up that area, then they come back when they're pushed out, and it's going back and forth. So we already were familiar with this process. We now had to look at how are we going to address the issues that are causing this. And again, we didn't have to become the expert. We just had to find out who was the expert and how do we support their work. One thing that we were able to do is get to a point where we started to look at developing this guide, which is an anti-displacement toolkit on green infrastructure specifically for the LA River. We partnered with a number of experts on it. And our whole goal was really looking at how do we make sure that the conservation work that we're doing in our park was gonna be able to exist past any one camp in particular, but really, instead of moving a camp, how can we start addressing these issues? And it was really hard at first. It was very shaky because you get a lot of resistance from within the organization, you get resistance from out of the organization. But what we were able to do is get some serious funding to work with partners to come up with a strategy. And this is what we end up doing. If you go to Greening in Place, it is available. We have written it specifically for the LA River. However, we wrote it in a way that we've included a number of examples from across the country that folks are able to relate to it. And it is a list of suggestions and things that can happen when you look at the city, joint authority, developers, and really making sure that responsibility is placed on them versus the community. Because I was able to see a lot of toolkits out there that really identify what it was doing was identifying things that community members could do. So not only are they on the verge of being displaced, but they're now also looking at having to become a lawyer to defend themselves and then figure out how to navigate city council and do all this research. So this is really about placing that responsibility on the cities, the officials that we elect into office, and to be able to hold them accountable. And this was one project that we were able to really get to display that we were serious about supporting the community. Now it gets to a point of, what's in it. I'm not going to go in through like a step by step, but these are some of the things that we've included. Again, how do we even read this as a biologist, as a scientist, as someone that is practicing conservation? It's like that's what we now have to get to, where we now have to do the work. We now have to do the research. If we're going to work in these communities, we don't get to choose all the good things about the community we want to work with. We have to take the crust of the bread as well. So we get into a place where we're doing a lot more work. We have to raise a lot more money. We have to partner with a lot of different organizations that get us to a place where we're able to do this. And if you look at it as, our approach to conservation, are you just going to go into a place and prescribe, restoration restoration plan. No, you're going to go in there and you're going to do the research to see what exists there. You're going to write your reports, and then you're going to come up with a plan that is proven to work. Or if it's a pilot, you're going to write it as a pilot. And then you're going to get the work, and you're going to be able to track what your findings are, and be able to come to the space with a lot more information on why you're doing the projects that you're doing. So one thing that we like to highlight, just in terms of what we learned through the process, is, you know, folks in the community are going to know what your motives are, not what your motives are, but whether you're doing this work authentically. And it's okay to be honest about why you're doing this work. Folks are going to get it. But what is important is to make sure that you're upfront with the exchange, because that's what it really is. It's an exchange of resources, and it's a partnership. And when you come at it with an authentic, I think, approach, you're going to be able to build partnerships that are going to help you through this process. And it's really placing value in the community. And I know if we have any grant writers out there, a lot of what keeps us with this, I guess, mindset of us coming in and saving a community is how we talk about the community. We tend to talk about the community not having any resources, needing environmental education. They need, because that's what the funders want to hear, right? You're delivering a project. So they want to know your impact is going to be great. If you were to go in there and say, hey, you know what, this community is amazing. The children are so smart. They're eager to learn. They love their space. Are folks going to want to give you money to deliver a program? If you were to go to a funder and say, you know what, I need to work with this community, like it's going to improve our organization so much to have a diverse voice at the table, we might not get that funding. So what we're identifying is the problem is not just on the ground. The problem is all the way up the ladder. And if that's what's triggering the funding, if that is where the conversation needs to happen, then when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, it needs to be at all levels. And it doesn't matter what your role is, what your job is. There's something that we can learn. There's something that we can do better. There's also something that we can share that you're already doing amazing. So they're really coming at this with an understanding that we want to remain teachable, that we want to be able to do good work, but we just have to phrase it a little differently. We have to look at what the priorities are, not just from our end, but from our partners, and see how we can all address making these projects happen. So this is me. These are some of the things that we have going on in Debs Park. Again, this was a quick snapshot, and one project that we're working on that I wanted to highlight that I think is meaningful to this discussion, because it does include the LA River, and that going to the running the watershed to the coast. So I thought it would be nice to include that instead of just talking about some of the work we're doing inland. But it's also really about sharing some examples. We had a lot that we had to learn. And instead of me just going on about everything, we were doing, I wanted to just really open it up to have a conversation. If you had some questions, keep it casual. Again, I don't have all the answers. I'm not the person that is going to be able to answer what you need to do and who you need to hire and how you need to do it. But I do care about what I do. I do love this work. And if you're doing this work, I kind of already like you just because you're doing this work. You're going to have to do something to change my mind. So believe me, a lot of folks changed my mind. But I'm going to already set you up for success. One thing that I look at is, for me, that this is the work. A lot of folks call my work equity, diversity, and inclusion work. They call my work EDI work, but I just call it work. In a similar fashion, when people call Mexican food, I just call it food. It's what I do. So one thing I just want to share is I hope we can all get to a point where we just call it work, and it's already within our lens, and we're able to make really awesome things happen.
That's great, Marcus. Thank you so much.
Wanted to stop sharing.
Oh, you have some questions for us.
Well, those were questions that they were, I guess, most popular questions. But I'm ready to talk about the questions you have. I can share some of those questions to get us started. But I guess one question that I would like to start us on. Let me see. I did something weird with my computer. Are you still seeing my screen, or
No, we have you back, but maybe you could just read it to us.
So one question I'll throw out there that I get a lot of is folks asking, how do you get approval to do this work? Isn't it mission drift? Or like, how do you get your board to approve this work? And it's a great question. I don't know if anyone is filling that out there. If anyone was thinking like, wow, like he just said human trafficking. Like, I thought this was going to be about birds. He's Audubon. It's okay, because a lot of people think that. I mean, I really had to work on myself. And again, that's where it comes with this holistic approach, because you're looking at all of these things that impact the environment. But yeah, I'm happy to hear what some of you are thinking.
Yeah, Kim, are you?
I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, first of all, for being our keynote kickoff speaker for the series. I'm the chair of the board for the Newport Bay Conservancy, and this is especially important to me, and I'm very excited that we had you speak. Everything you said was along the lines exactly of what we're working on very hard to do in a community that's a little different than yours, I would say. And I have a bunch of questions, but there was one in particular that Susan had asked me to ask. So I'm going to ask that one, and then hopefully I'll have time to ask you the other one. So one question was how you handle the urban-suburban interface, or how do you apply the approach of reaching the greater community when you're in a suburban setting like we're in. And I don't know if you've had that experience in LA where you've sought to go beyond the immediate surroundings of Deb Park to the greater LA area. We are making a concerted effort right now to reach beyond the boundaries of Newport Beach and getting into the broader, what I like to call the watershed that's feeding into the bay, so that we can reach a wider audience for not only participation, but also engagement in our programs, participation at the bay and the recreation, but engagement with us. So if you have any experiences in that area, going beyond the folks that are right in your region there, if that's something that you've done, if you can share that, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, we have done a fair amount of that. And one thing that we learn in being successful, it needs to be relevant. So for us, when we talk about, like, our goal is not just to get people to Debs Park. Our goal is to be able to engage people in a meaningful way wherever they are. So if it is a bird program, a bird walk, a bird talk, if it is a restoration site, a cleanup, whatever it is, we'll bird it up, and then we're able to share how we engage in a very different way. And then we start talking about the issues that are relevant to us, as well as that exchange of what the community concern is. So I think what ends up happening, if this is something that you're looking at for the Conservancy, you have to first figure out what that goal is, and where you're able to meet the community. Because it gets to a point where it's just like, well, are we going to go down to Newport Bay and run a bird walk? For you guys, yeah, we would. But it's not something that we're naturally going to think of and say, hey, you know what? We need to point a map and start doing work over there. So for us, we're a part of a much larger organization with Audubon, California. So we have a network of chapters that we're also able to engage with. So for us, I think it's a little different because we are able to lean into that network. But if you're looking for suggestions, I would first look at, doing some asset mapping. And a lot of my methods and the way that I approach this work is what we call community organizing 101. And it's really adopting community organizing practices and just sharing what we'd like to share through conservation. And for me, it was easier for me to find folks from the environmental justice field or the social justice field and teach them conservation issues than it was to find a biologist or a conservationist and teach them social justice issues. I could teach someone a bird in 6 months. I can't teach you, the history of United States or with those experiences in that time. So knowing which jobs you can make that choice or have that balance. With that said, I still have a biologist. You know what I mean? I still have folks that are going to be able to produce scientific results. But we make sure that those folks also understand this process. So being able to expand, you're going to need the staff that's going to be able to understand that and how to do that work, because it's not just important for the community to have someone that they can relate to. It's important for your staff member to be able to decompress with everything that is going on in the world as well. And you want to set your staff up for success.
Great, thank you. Kim, did you want to ask another question, or we can just open it up to
Yeah, I'll
anybody?
just open it up. I don't want to dominate, and I'm sure other people have good questions too.
Well, I'll say something. Marcos, thank you so much. I'm Heather, the operations, the staff member, one of them at the Newport Bay Conservancy. So thank you for talking to our board. We have a couple board members here today, so thank you very much. And hearing you and hearing about Debs Parks make me so nostalgic to be up in LA, because I was with Amigos de los Rios for a while before moving down to Orange County. But what I'd really want to hear from you is, how did you first connect with nature, right? So as we go to look at connecting diverse people to nature, how do we inspire that? Like, was it scary the first time that you camped outside? How do we get through some of those barriers to make sure people feel welcome at Newport Beach? Because we're not as diverse as a community in the city itself, but we want to make sure we can welcome anybody to come walk trails, to come bird, do whatever they want to do and feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think for me it was a mixed bag, because I look at nature again. My nature experience was running around in the LA River, running around in Debs Park. I don't think I shared it in the presentation, but my parents met 1 block from Debs Park at the bus stop. It was probably the last time they took the bus, but it happens. Sparks were flying. My grandmother, who is 97, still lives a half a block from Debs Park, so it was kind of my destiny to work there. The thing is, you see what it is. I mean, the tree canopy, we had street trees, we had Debs Park, Elysian Valley, all of these areas to explore. But what really got me out, and I don't want anyone to take my head off with this, was I was dirt bike riding. We would go out to the desert and tear it up. We'd go out to the trails and tear it up. And that was my exposure to nature at a very young age, going camping with family members that were already doing it, that were experiencing the outdoors. Maybe they'd look up at the stars every now and then. Maybe they'd see a cool bird every now and then, but they were out there having fun. And that community that was there, and the experience and the love and and everything that exists with that was there. And that's what I remember. I don't remember the damage. I don't remember people spilling gas. I don't remember sensitive habitat being destroyed. I just remember being out there with family and friends. Fast forward to today, my kids, they don't know anything else other than camping and being outdoors. They can name 50 birds, about 50 trees, and they're kind of geeky when it comes to nature. They would, swear that they're cool, right? But they're kind of nature geeks right now. So the thing is, the experience is different. They had conversations with their friends, and they just assumed that everyone camped. So when they were talking to friends I live in Eagle Rock now, which is a pretty affluent neighborhood. They're like, "Oh, we don't go camping." Like, what's it? They're like, "What do you mean? Like, I thought everyone does. Like, I have an option not to go camping." So now it's a different conversation. But for me, it was very much going out and dirt bike riding. I haven't been dirt bike riding in a really long time. Especially now that we're going to be closing down Oceanic Dunes. But again, it's also understanding one of these things like, well, how do we get those folks not just to shut down everything they want to do, but in that process, appreciate some of the things that are going out there. And some of those folks really do a good job in terms of staying on trails and not causing too much damage.
Cool, thanks. Absolutely. I also like the point when you were talking about going out in your communities, and that's something that we really haven't done. We've, really, I mean, at least from my point of view, felt like the best way to experience the Bay is being there in person. But I do like the idea of reaching out and going into those communities. Is there something like when you go out and teach, do you then invite them back to see if anybody does make it to Debs Park? I mean, you're satisfied with just giving them that fun and inspiration to care about nature, birds, what have you?
Yeah, because again, it's gonna come back to what is your goal. Yeah. If your goal is to go out of Newport Bay to bring as many people back to Newport Bay, then that's what you're going to be tracking. My goal is to engage as many people in taking that personal responsibility of becoming a land steward, becoming someone that is going to appreciate nature in a very meaningful way. They can do that anywhere. They can do it in their backyard. They can do it at a neighbor's house. They can do it at Debs Park. So if they do make it at Debs Park, I make sure that they're going to come and say hi, but that's not my goal, to get them to come back to Debs Park. It's a very different process, I think, when we step into this field thinking that a place is better for whatever feature it has. And for a really long time, Audubon was taking people out to the bay when they had Debs Park right there. This was before Debs Park was built. And this idea was, wow, we're taking all these folks out to show them something they don't have, but yet they have something really amazing in their own backyard. Now we try to get folks out into many different landscapes as possible. But once you start to appreciate what you have, it's a very different process in moving forward. And it really gets to environmental education, because when we have our programs, right, what do we teach? Saving water, right? That's one. And native plants, that's another, and recycling. Well, if you look at a lot of these communities that we're trying to teach, and you look at their carbon footprint, it's going to be some news, because they have a very low carbon footprint. You look in my grandma's fridge, right? You're going to see, 3 butter containers, and only one of them is going to have butter in it. You try to go down the neighborhood and, no one is throwing any recyclables away. If they do, you'll have an environmentalist show up early in the morning to pull that recyclable out your can. So it's interesting to me to think that our environmental education depends on educating the population that has the smallest carbon footprint.
Interesting. Sadly, we're almost out of time. I wonder if anybody has one last question you'd like to pose for Marcus?
No one does. I have a bird question, but I'll wait until see if anybody else does.
No, go ahead, Kim. It's on you.
Well, first I want to quickly say that I love what you just said, because I think one thing that we need to think about at Newport Bay, something that I'm a former geologist, would like to see us think about, is the expanding our community, the watershed, and going out to people to explain that what they do where they are impacts the bay, and the bay impacts them as well. So that they don't have to come to the bay to appreciate the restoration, and they don't have to come to the bay to realize the impacts. So just being broader in our educational outreach, I think, would be an important part of our mission. And hopefully that would also encourage people to come to the bay and engage and enjoy and recreate. But my question for you is a little bit strange. I grew up in Long Beach, and I remember hearing as a kid that there were flocks of parrots, wild parrots, that flew through Los Angeles. So you could see them fly through the trees. And that apparently that they had, at some point in time in history, people had gotten them as domestic parrots, and eventually they got out and they just swarmed and found each other. Is that true, or is it an urban myth? And have you seen them at Deb Park?
So if you're talking about like the red crown parrot, like, yeah, I haven't done the research myself, but I am like sure that was something that happened, that the parrots were able to get free somehow and were able to survive. I know one thing we also have here now, I don't know if it made it down to Newport, are red whisker bulbuls, which are amazing. Like, they look beautiful, almost like an airbrush painting. And there's a large amount of them over at the Huntington, and they just are now in Eagle Rock. They're along the foothills, and everyone's calling us like, oh my God, these beautiful birds. And for me, also along the lines of EDI is I don't say, hey, they don't belong here, so you can't appreciate them. So it's just like, whatever you like, right? One thing that I would like to share, and maybe I could put it in the chat, or if Susan can send it out to the group, is a project that we're working on, the Debs Park, and it's across the country. It's called Mapping Migraciones. And what we're doing is we're collecting people's migration story from the Americas or through the Americas. And just they're sharing how they were able to get to where they are and where they came from. And what we're doing is connecting that with bird migration, because no one ever looks at a beautiful bird that is migrating through and saying, wow, I can't wait for you to go back to where you came from. But yet we do that with people. So one thing we wanted to do is really show like the beauty of everything that we have here. And just do it in a cool way, because we love awesome stories and we love birds.
That's beautiful. I love that.
We did the Dead Park, so I'll be up there. My daughter lives up in LA, not too far away from there. So I just texted her and said, expect mom to come pick you up and take you to Dead Park.
So currently we are closed. We're looking at opening up in June.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot about pandemic for a half a second.
Right. Marcus, thank you so much. This is really wonderful. It's a great start to our series, and I really, really appreciated hearing about the concept that you're working from. I think it's really going to give us a lot to think about and a lot to work from. So, so thanks again.
Yeah, it was great. And anyone, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk about this work, and I'm always happy to hear what y'all got working.
Great. Let's keep in touch.